everybody.
Good
So
morning.
today we're going to talk about the Amidah. I think I wanted to spend at least 2 sessions talking about the Amidah, which is the other major building block of Jewish prayer, Jewish community prayer. So let's do that now. Okay, so I'm going to start with showing you. There's 2 documents I have for this. They're both PDF files. So this one is kind of the outline of what I want to say. And then the other one is some Torah texts that are sort of the sources for the opening blessings of the Amidah. So as with most Jewish prayer, the rabbis, when they kind of created these structures, they had a lot of material to work with. They weren't freestyling it. They weren't just composing completely original ideas. What they did was they had certain ideas that they wanted to convey based on their knowledge of Jewish sources and wisdom, and then they selected elements from the vast material of Jewish literature, mostly the Bible, some rabbinic commentaries on the Bible, and they selected different little pieces to put together what I would call like a mosaic. So you have like a mosaic. The way you make a mosaic is you take sheets of rock or whatever that are different colors, and then you smash the sheet into a million pieces, and you take the little pieces, now use them as colors, and you paste them into a new thing to make a picture. And if you're really good at it, you can make a really interesting 3-dimensional picture based on the different colors of the pieces of the rock that you smashed. So what you've done is you've taken the raw material, which was colored sheet of rock, and you created a beautiful new thing, a picture out of it. And that's, in a way, sort of a nice metaphor for what the rabbis did. They knew the picture they wanted to create based on ideas they wanted to convey. And then they took snippets from Jewish literature, little snippets of pieces, and they arranged them in a particular way to make a whole new picture, right? They borrowed phrases and words and sentences from other places, and they brought them together and said, here, we're going to make this new thing based on the raw materials that we were given.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Was this like a committee? I mean, you're talking about, is this like a one-time thing, or has evolved over the years?
Yeah, so we don't really know exactly. So here's what we do know. The Mishnah is we have some scrolls and books that were left out of our Bible from the couple centuries before the Common Era, like the books of Maccabees and a bunch of other books. And they give us some little windows into Jewish society at the time, kind of showing what people were thinking, what they were believing, maybe a little bit about life in their community, if you read them as source material in that way. But it doesn't help us a lot with what was going on prayer-wise. Interestingly, in the Christian Bible, we get also a couple windows into what's going on, because, for instance, Jesus preaches in a synagogue. He gets up and he reads scripture, and then he expounds on it. Well, that probably was something that was just commonly done. People who were preacher teachers in the Jewish world, that's what they would do in synagogues. Synagogues were meeting places, and they would get together and read some scripture, and then somebody would teach about it, preach about it. So we kind of know that. But the actual structure of prayer that we have today, the real evidence we have for that is from the Mishnah, which is written or edited around the year 200. And it's not like it was all invented in the year 200. So it's describing things that were already going on. And it even says it's describing in some places what went on in the temple when the temple stood. So something went on 150 years, maybe even earlier, before the Mishnah, right? But there's only basic structures. So the Amidah, the best scholars can figure, was sort of constructed, the structure of it, was fixed sometime in the late Second Temple period. That's what we think, basically. To answer your question shortly,
Yes,
right?
thank you.
Sometime in that generation before or after Jesus, somewhere around there, there was a structure of an Amidah, and most likely the Amidah was really, I mean, it was beginning to be structured, but it really became fixed after the temple's destroyed. And this is the key thing for us this morning, because the Amidah replaces the community sacrifice that was offered in the, it's a good thing the temple's behind me now in this picture, replaces the worship of in the temple in Jerusalem. So remember that the temple up there on the Temple Mount over there, the people, there would be this constant stream of people bringing their personal sacrifices there so it was their personal effort to have a private communion with God in a very tangible, awesome kind of way. You can imagine standing up there on the Temple Mount, watching all the proceedings, smelling the sacrifices, eating the sacrifice that was given back to you as roasted meat and so on. It was a big thing. But in addition to the individual sacrifices that are brought, there are two community offerings that are brought every single day. One, when the temple first opened for business, the priest would offer a sacrifice for the day. And then in the afternoon, he offered a second sacrifice, sort of on behalf of all of Israel. And it's those two sacrifices that the Amidah comes to replace. So when the rabbis are trying to figure out what themes to put into this prayer structure that we're going to use, that Jews anywhere in the world can gather together as a community to offer as their sort of community sacrifice, right? I'm just thinking about this now. We're now living in this COVID-19 world, and we can't even come together as a community in our synagogue anymore, right? So now we do structures that we've followed when we were in the synagogue, even though we can't be in the synagogue. And the rabbis had created this structure to have a community offering when you couldn't be at the temple anymore. The same kind of an idea. You can't be in the temple to worship there where we want to. So here's something we can do in our community, separate communities, wherever we are. We gather together, we can say this structure of prayers and offer it like our community offering to God. That's the idea specifically of the Amidah. So the other prayer structure we looked at, the Shema and its blessings, is strictly a Torah-based ritual. The Torah says you should recite the Shema when you lie down and when you rise up. And so they created that structure unit to say in the evening and in the morning. This replaces, and that doesn't have anything to do with the sacrifices. This has to do with the sacrifices. And we're going to replace the morning sacrifice with shacharit, right? What we can now call the shacharit service. And we're going to replace the afternoon sacrifice with the mincha service. And now you're going to ask me, well, what about Mariv? So we also do an Amidah at Mariv. But there was no sacrifice in the evening, right? In the evening, the gates of the temple closed and the priests went to bed or whatever, ate their meal and went and slept. The gates of the temple are closed. There's no sacrifices. So again, we're not sure because nobody was taking notes at the time. But what we think happened was Jews were still coming together in the evening to do the Shema together, right? That other unit. And when they were getting together to do the Shema, they said, you know what? It's not really like having a community thing if we're not also doing an Amidah. So let's throw an Amidah in also. So now they're doing the Shema and the Amidah in the evening service in Ma'ariv. But and this is the thing, there's no repetition of the Amidah in the evening by the prayer leader. When you come together as a minyan, a prayer quorum, to do a public service, you don't do the Amidah out loud in the evening. The prayer leader doesn't do it out loud. No repetition of the Amidah. And so that's why I think the idea is that's that repetition, that public offering of the Amidah, so to speak, that replaces the public sacrifice, right? And that's why we only do it when there was a public sacrifice, and that was in the morning and the afternoon. There was no public sacrifice in the evening. So we're throwing in an Amidah because you want to have your private communion with God, but it's not a public sacrifice. It's not replacing any temple worship. So now we learn that the Amidah actually satisfies two purposes. The first is to replace the public sacrifice in the morning and the afternoon. But the second is to have your own private audience with God, even without a community. And that's why, even if you can't get to a minyan, you still do the Amidah yourself, right? Jews should still be praying 3 times a day in their homes, even if they're not in a minyan. And the reason is because you want to have that private communion with God. It's sort of like your private sacrifice. So what's really liberating, I would say, about that is that when the temple stood in Jerusalem, if you wanted to have that private audience with God, you had to actually go there, which was a big deal. They didn't have cars, and people weren't rich. And it's a lot of money to pack up your donkey and take a few days to travel to Jerusalem and then buy an animal to sacrifice and so on. This was a big undertaking to do, and not everybody could do this, and certainly not on a regular basis. Now you have an Amidah that you can say at home. You don't have to spend any money and not nearly as much time. There's no journey to Jerusalem. You just open your prayer book and there you are. And sadly, we, and I include myself here, often don't think about it that way. We don't think about what a liberating experience it is to be able to have a private audience with God 3 times every day. What a great idea, you know. And you just do it on your own. But that's what the Amidah was designed to do. So let's go back to our handout here. So the Amidah. So in the temple times, we looked at, I think last time, Mishnah Tamid, where the priest would do the Shema and the blessing before the Shema, then he'd do the Shema, then he'd do Emet V'Yatziv or whatever, and the Micha Mocha. Do you remember this at all? And then he would do the priestly blessing at the end, and then God accept our prayers, or sorry, the sacrifice and the manner it's offered. And then he would do the priestly blessing at the end. The priestly blessing was the last thing. So those elements from Mishnah Tamid became sort of the initial building blocks for the Amidah, right? So the priestly blessing is the last blessing of the Amidah. In the morning, right, we do right before Sim Shalom. If you have a Kohanim there, right, they do Yevarechecha Adonai V'Yishmerecha. And if they don't have a Kohen, the prayer leader recites the priestly blessing. And instead of asking God to accept our sacrifices, we ask God to accept our prayers. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu b'Amcha Yisrael uv'tfilatam. Be satisfied with your people and with their prayers, right? Because we can't be in the temple to offer you real sacrifices. So those elements from early temple times get incorporated into the Amidah. The Talmud suggests that the Amidah was created by the men of the Great Assembly in the Second Temple period sometime. But most modern scholars believe it is more likely to have been fixed in terms of the structure of 18 or 19 blessings by the end of the Mishnaic period. And there's a statement in the Talmud that Shimon HaPakuli arranged the order of the 18 benedictions before Rabbeinu Rabban Gamliel at Yavne. So he's the one who created this 18 blessing structure. And what the Talmud might mean when it says the men of the Great Assembly established the Amidah is they might have established that early proto-Amidah that's described in the Mishnah Tamid. But the final structure of it is established by Shimon HaPakuli before Rabban Gamliel. And so that's shortly after the destruction, right? Yavne. Yavne is the first academy that opened after the destruction of Jerusalem. Right? Yes. Daniel.
19.
Question?
The men of the Great Assembly, is that the same as the Sanhedrin?
Why do you say that?
Yeah, so we wish we knew. The term in Hebrew is Anshe Knesset HaGadolah, which just means the people of the Great Assembly. Yeah, probably. It was either the Sanhedrin or the Proto-Sanhedrin, what morphed into the Sanhedrin. Some kind of a community religious authority structure.
Okay, Rabbi,
Yeah.
my husband says there's 19 benedictions.
Yes, right. So originally there were 18, and now there's 19. So then you have this statement from Brachot 28b, where Rabban Gamliel said to the sages, "Is there no one who knows how to establish a prayer against the heretics?" So we'll talk about who those heretics are in a minute. And Shmuel Hakatan stood up and he established it. So, so based on this Talmudic passage, which is in the same page as the Shimon HaPakuli one, and it's the same Rabban Gamliel. Based on this passage, early Jewish scholars thought the 19th blessing, right, what you're just talking about, was the one that was added by Shmuel HaKatan, who established the prayer against the heretics.
Okay,
I
should have read further.
Al Hamal Shanim, right, on those who slander us, let their, beg God destroy them and wipe them out. Modern Talmudic scholars, though, say that they don't think that's what happened. They think Rabban Gamliel was just asking for a formula for that blessing that already existed. To take a blessing that already existed and to formulate it to include whoever these heretics are. And so Shmuel HaKatan did that. But it was already part of the 18. So if that's the question, what made the 19th blessing? So here is the answer to that question. They say, based on early manuscripts, that the 19th blessing was really created by splitting what was originally one blessing into two. Blessing number 14 was about building Jerusalem, and blessing number 15 was establishing the throne of David, right, the Messianic era. And they say, based on manuscripts, they've seen where 14 and 15 seem to have been combined into one, and then later they seem to have been separated. So based on that, they think that that's where the 19th blessing came from. But in any case, it's very early, really this early 2 centuries. Even by the time of the Mishnah, we already have 19 blessings, but the name 18 had already been sort of created. So it's still sometimes called the Shmona Esrei, which literally means the 18, right? So the Amidah is sometimes still called the 18 blessings, even though for 1800 years or so, it's been 19 blessings. Okay, so it replaces the daily sacrifice, and the evening was added later. But the private Amidah also has a specific purpose, the private audience before God. And as I like to think of it, it's a laundry list or a shopping list of things you might want to say to God. And it's so the image I have in mind is you're entering the throne room of a king, or if you like, because it was a great dramatic movie that many of us experienced first in our childhood and left a deep impression on us, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, right? So when Dorothy first has her audience in the Wizard of Oz, she comes in not just with herself, but she comes with her 3 friends, right? The Cowardly Lion and the silly Straw Man and the heartless Tin Man are her 3 friends. So she and her little dog Toto. So she has some support for coming into the presence of this awesome, fearsome, terrifying presence of, which when we were kids, we were all felt this way about the movie. At least I did. Oh my God, it's the Wizard of Oz. It's terrifying, right? And so she's in that presence and she's trembling, right? So you imagine we are entering not the throne room of the Wizard of Oz, who's a fictional character, but something a million times more dramatic. We're entering into the presence of the creator of the whole universe, So that could be terrifying. And not intended to be. I don't think God wants us to be terrified, but it's certainly awe-inspiring. It's certainly humbling, right? To feel like you're in the presence of the force that created this amazing world that we live in. So when you first come into that audience, the things that we do and say at the beginning of that experience sort of kind of ease us into that moment. So the first thing is what I call the Texas 3-step, because I call it, because we're in Texas now, the Texas 2-step, but it's really a 3-step, right? You're supposed to take 3 steps forward when you enter God's presence. But since the pews in most synagogues are close together, if you took 3 steps forward, you'd fall over the back of the seats in front of you. You take 3 baby steps back, pushing yourself up against the chair behind you, and then 3 baby steps forward to go as far forward as you can. So the reason for going back is just so that you can go forward. If you're in the aisle, you don't need to take 3 steps back. Some people do anyway. But the point is to take those 3 steps and imagine as you're doing that, that you're entering into God's courtroom, so to speak, right? As I like to always say, God's everywhere all the time. So he's with us in our homes with our masks, or when we're out with our masks on in the shopping center, or wherever we happen to go. God is everywhere all the time, but human beings have a hard time grasping that or thinking about that all the time. This is a time we're going to focus on being in God's presence. So we want to do something, kinetically to put to get our head around the idea that we're now going to be concentrating on the fact that we're in God's presence. So we do this because going into a courtroom of a king was something our ancestors had some experience with or had heard about. And we can imagine too, because we have movies that talk about it. Wait, I want to go to Daniel, who had a raised hand.
Just a ritual question. So you've taken the 3 steps forward. You do the silent Amida, and you take 3 steps back.
Right.
At least that's the way I do it. Then you have the repeat. Do you take 3 steps forward again, or do you never back up, or what is?
So you don't have to repeat the 3 steps forward and backwards when there's the repetition of the Amidah. That's now you're not the person who is specifically in God's presence. You're watching the person who's in God's presence. So now it's more of the experience of being in the temple, watching the priest do his thing. And except now we've egalitarianized it. You don't have to be a priest because there's no sacrifice. So the prayer leader is doing it on behalf of the community, and you're now a spectator. You're watching the proceedings. We do still bow at the beginning and end of the first blessing, and we bow again at Modim Anachnu Lach. Kind of in the way, when the analogy, I guess, would be when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur and pronounced God's name, everybody fell on their face, right? Not just the high priest, everybody, because we're pronouncing God's name. So by the same token, the priest is doing the service, or the prayer leader, the Shaliach Tzibur, is doing the service, but we still bow because it's showing respect to God for as the prayer is being recited. But you're not in the courtroom particularly, you're in the balcony seats, so to speak.
Thank you very much. That's I've actually asked that question to several authorities and never gotten a really good answer. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, so let's go back to our let's go back to our thing here. Where is it? Oh, here we go. Is that it? No, that's not it. Where? Okay, here. Boom. Yeah, so we've the Amidah was at a list. So the private Amidah has a specific private audience with God, and it's like Dorothy, and hence the choreography of 3 steps back and 3 steps forward. Now, the other thing that you do when you used to come into the throne room of God was you would bow to the king. And there was a formalized way of bowing, where you'd bend your knees and bow. And so that's what we're doing now with God. So on the opening blessing of the Avot, when we say Baruch Atah Adonai, we bend our knees on Baruch. We bow for Atah, and then we stand up for God's name, Adonai. So it's Baruch Atah Adonai. And then we do that again at the end of Avot. And that's the last time we bow until we get to the end with Modim Anachnu Lach. Thank you, God. So again, when the king would grant your request, you wanted to show your gratitude to the king, right? And there are requests in the Amidah, at least during the weekday. But even if you don't have a request, you want to, I mean, the prayer itself is thanking God for the miracles that are with us every minute of our lives. The fact that we can breathe, which in this world today now is a big deal to be able to breathe. That we can still eat our food and drink and our bodies function, and there's friends who we can Zoom with. All the different things that are in our lives that we're grateful for, we're grateful to God. Even if we didn't ask God for anything special, just the fact that we're living is special. So it's modim and thank you, God. And here we don't bend the knees because it's not the formal introductory kind of a blessing. It's a thank you kind of a thing. So it's just bowing to the king, saying thank you for everything that you've done for us. At the end of that blessing, you do bend your knees, Baruch Atah, and bow, and then stand up again. One way to remember this, and maybe have something to do with the idea of bending knees, is that the word Baruch, we talked about in an earlier session, which comes from the Akkadian or the Near Eastern idea of a numinous power, barakah, Baruch, that God has these numinous powers. But another form of that same root is berech, which means knee. And so when you say Baruch, you're bending your knees, you're berech. Yeah, so so there's that also. And so at the beginning of the Modim prayer, there's no Baruch, so there's no reason to bend your knees, you're just bowing. Okay, so that's that part there. So you come in with your private audience to God, you take your 3 steps back, your 3 steps forward. And now again, like Dorothy coming with her friends, the first blessing of the Amidah says, we also are not coming alone. You know, we're just puny human beings in the vastness of space, a tiny ball at the outer end of the spiral galaxy, whatever it is. Well, who are we? Well, we are part of a people who have had a relationship with God for 4,000 years, back to the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so the very first thing we do when we come in to introduce ourselves to God in this private audience is to say, you, God, you remember us because you had a relationship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now in our modern egalitarian world, we add also that God had a relationship with Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, the 4 mothers. So that's like Dorothy bringing her friends with her. So we're bringing our ancestors with us, right, so to speak. They're our moral support as we come to face God. We come with a long tradition of having this relationship with God. Also reminds us that that God has a history with us particularly, but with the world in general, that God has a role in history, right? Going back at least, well, we believe going back to Adam and Eve, but at least with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now the expression Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob, is one of those snippets of the Mosaic, right? It's a piece of tile that was taken from the Torah. So it's actually taken from the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verse 6. Similar ideas repeated in verse 15. Moses first encounters God at the burning bush, and God says to him, I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Right, just that way. That gave rise to a question in Rashi. Rashi did a commentary on the Torah. So on this verse, Rashi says, why did God have to repeat God? Why didn't he say God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Why did he have to say God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob? And Rashi answers the question because God had a different relationship with each one of them. Sort of, in a way, kind of before Martin Buber and I and Thou. I don't know how many of you know. I know about this much about Martin Buber. It's been a long. I learned a little about him in college, but that was a long time ago. But Martin Buber's big book was I and Thou, and he was all about relationship. The idea that every human being is an individual, is a person. And it's all about having a relationship with other people and seeing them as people, not as objects of your desires or fantasies or whatever. They're not people that you can manipulate, that you can cheat or steal or lie. You know, they are human beings, and the ultimate value of life is entering into an I-thou relationship with another person, to really see that other person as a full human being. And once you get that, you can extrapolate to having that relationship with God, right? The ultimate thou, right? Try and have that relationship with the ultimate source of everything, and an intimate relationship, that recognizing the full godness of God, as it were, right? That's the I-thou relationship. So, why did I want to say that? So each of us has our own relationship with God, and that's our own I-thou relationship. And so Abraham had his relationship with God, and here's the thing Buber said. In each relationship, that person is also unique. Each person is also unique. So my relationship with my brother, for instance, is a unique person of Henry, my brother, whereas his relationship with his wife is a different Henry, so to speak, because it's a different relationship, right? And in the same way, God is the same God, but God is interpreted, understood, comprehended differently for each person, right? And although we may have similar ways to express our understanding of God, it's unique to each of us. So that's the idea that Rashi is trying to say hundreds of years before Martin Buber, that the relationship is part of what defines God. So it's the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, because they're slightly different, even though it's the same being. Does that make sense?
I can see, Rabbi, how you remember nothing at all about Martin Buber from your classes. Just as an aside, I enjoyed what you just said immensely and can relate to it. If you ever wanted to teach a class or two on Martin Buber, I would be there.
Okay. So anyway, so that's one thing about that, and so now, since we know the snippet, remember, so this is a mosaic that the rabbis are creating when they create the prayer avot. They're taking snippets from the Bible. So they took this snippet from Exodus, the story of Moses' first encounter with God, and since we know where that tile originally belonged, we can. Since we know where that tile originally belonged, we can think about what it meant in its own context. Okay, so understanding that, when we say Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, we can also add Elohei Moshe, right? Because it's also hinting at, yeah, and God had a really special relationship with Moses. And what does that mean? And if you want to go even further, we can remember that Moses' encounter with God was at a burning bush. And the idea that the bush was, there's a midrash that the bush was always burning and everybody was walking by paying no attention. But Moses, for whatever reason, noticed the burning bush and turned aside to take a look. And so, again, we are now turning aside to spend a moment with God. We're turning aside to have our own burning bush experience with God in our Amidah, right? You can bring that sort of into the picture. I think that's hinted at by this piece of tile the rabbis stole from Exodus to put into their prayer. And it also can indicate the reverence we should have when reciting it, and the opportunity for revelation, right? Because this is the moment of revelation. God also revealed something about God to Moses. And this is our opportunity to seek God's revelation in the audience as well as our speaking. So we turn aside to see, right? And it's holy ground, right? Remember, God says to Moses, take your shoes off because you're standing on holy ground. As we enter God's courtroom, we're also standing on holy ground. Don't have to take your shoes off, but just have that sense of reverence. And then in Exodus 3:15, it says, "This shall be my name forever. This shall be my appellation forever." Each had an individual name of God. Okay, right. Okay. So then it's after Avot, then it says, "Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanorah." That is the great, mighty, and awesome God. And this again comes from Moses in Deuteronomy 10:17. I said read the context, so we'll look at that in a moment. And it's decreed. So the men of the great assembly said, "That's all you should say about God, just that He's the great, mighty, awesome." And they said, "Why do they say that?" Because there's no end to the adjectives that you could apply to God, right? He's great, mighty, awesome, magnificent, wonderful, super, outstanding, excellent, fantastic, and you never get to the end of the prayer. So they said, look, this is what Moses said. That's enough for us. Don't add more adjectives. Just leave it at that. So great, mighty, awesome, they said, just leave it at that. So let's take a look at where that comes from, some Torah sources. This is the scene, by the way. This is the Torah source, the other handout for the class. So this was Moses turning aside to see the burning bush, and he says, "I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob." Moses hid his face because he was afraid. And he says, "When I go to the Israelites and say, 'The God of your father has sent me,' what should I say is your name?" And he says, "Ehiyah Asher Ehiyah, I'll be what I will be." This kind of informs that opening prayer of the Amidah. We're standing before the one who is. I will be what I will be. Okay, here's the Deuteronomy quote. "And now, Israel, what does the Lord command of you? Only this, to revere the Lord your God and to walk in his ways, to love him and serve God with all your heart and soul, keeping the commandments which I enjoin upon you. For the Lord your God is God supreme, Lord supreme, the great, the mighty, and awesome God." There's that snippet right there. That was then included in the context, right? So so what is it doing here? It's reminding us not only that God is the great, mighty, and awesome God, but that all God wants is that we love him and don't forget that we're creatures created to serve his purposes. The God Most High, El Elyon, that comes from the blessing that Melchizedek gave to Abraham in Genesis chapter 14. Magen Abraham is how the blessing ends. Shield of Abraham, that comes from God in chapter 15, after the defeat of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the defeat of the kings who conquered Sodom and Gomorrah and took Lot away captive, right? Abraham goes out and chases after them and defeats them, brings back the captives and the spoils. Melchizedek blesses him in the name of the God Most High, El Elyon. And then in the next chapter, God calls him, "I am your shield of Abraham." And we now add the imahot, as I said, for to be egalitarian. Right? God has relationship with women too. It's important for men to remember that. Okay, now we're on to Gevurot, second blessing. So now we've introduced ourselves. We're standing in God's presence. We've come with this long history with God. Now we want to recognize God's awesome powers and his barakah, right? And among the awesome powers that God has, the most awesome of all is that he has the power of life over death. He can create life. He can recreate life. This idea is repeated several times in this blessing, Mechaye Meitim. And the reason is because this comes from a dispute between the Sadducees and the Pharisees over the idea of resurrection. The Pharisees believed in resurrection, the Sadducees didn't. And the Pharisees wanted to pound home the idea that we must believe in resurrection, that God will reconstitute our bodies, restore our souls to our bodies when the world is at peace and the Messiah has come. I personally am a heretic, I guess. I'm not so convinced about resurrection. To me, it doesn't make sense with the laws of physics. But I do believe in the spiritual afterlife. I believe that there is more to life than what is in this world. I believe in a spiritual afterlife. And so, so I do a typical move that we do in the conservative movement, which is if you don't like the words, you you transform their meaning. So I'm reminded, and I don't remember the exact quote anymore, from Alice in Wonderland, or maybe it was Alice in the Looking Glass. Humpty Dumpty, who has this conversation with Alice about words. And she says, but the word doesn't mean that. And Humpty Dumpty says, the words mean what I say they mean. And that's the sort of beauty of language, right? Human beings have created language, and meanings of words change over time. And meanings of words, many words have many meanings, and you have to try and understand what the person saying them means. So when I say Mechaye Metim, the words Mechaye Metim in that blessing, I'm not thinking about resurrection of the dead, because I'm not convinced of that. But I do believe in a spiritual afterlife. So I just think it's talking about that. He is going to maintain my soul after this earthly experience. If you don't believe in that either, and some Jews don't, you can understand that he sort of in an original sense, the the idea that trees come back to life in the spring, that new life is created when we have children, when animals have babies. That sort of God is part of that process of always creating new things. So one generation dies, Metim, and another one comes to life, Mechaye, right? So it can be part of the cycle of life. So you don't have to change the words necessarily. You can just, when you're praying, it's your prayer, it's your relationship with God, right? It goes back to the I thou thing. The words can mean what you want them to mean when you're praying them. The value of saying the same words is that it does help to keep us together as a people and to keep us on the same page and as a community. Now, every now and then, we feel we have to change the words. So our movement, for instance, added the Imahot, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. The Reform movement in this blessing changed the words. Instead of saying Mechaye Metim, they said Mechaye Hakol, which means he gives life to everything, right? He brought life into existence and he sustains life in the universe. And it doesn't have anything to do with bringing life to the dead. So they actually felt it necessary to change the words of the prayer to Mechaye Hakol. We haven't done that. We just reinterpret the words. Okay, so so that's about that. So the dispute with the Pharisees. So that kind of deals with that. Perhaps can say we just don't really understand what exactly this might mean, as we don't understand many details in a complex universe, and it's just a simple words that convey a direction of thought, not a definition. God's power extends beyond, the realm of life and death, and the meaning and significance of human life extends beyond the realm of this earth and the universe. That's from Reuben Hammer, one of my teachers. Really good book on Jewish prayer, if you'd like to get it, called Entering Jewish Prayer. He goes through the history of how the prayer book developed, the structure of the prayers, but then he adds, what can a prayer mean to us today as modern Jews, like he did here. So it's a good book in that way. Now, the prayer B'chai Metim is not just about God giving life to the dead. He also talks about other acts that he does, acts of loving kindness. So in the first blessing of the Amidah, we said that Gomel Chasadim Tovim, that God does acts of kindness. Anyway, now in this blessing, it's spelled out. We imitate God in doing these things. So let me go to the other source for that. So in the old Sim Shalom prayer book, there was this interesting text from the Talmud. Rabbi Chama said in the name of Rabbi Hanina, follow Adonai your God. That's what it commands us to do in chapter 13 of Deuteronomy. What does it mean? How can you follow God? Is it possible for a mortal to follow God's presence? The verse means to teach us that we should follow the attributes of the Holy One. Just as God clothes the naked, we should clothe the naked. When did God clothe the naked? So I put in the Bible verses here. Genesis 3:21, when he kicks Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, he gives them clothes to wear, right? So that was put into the Bible, according to Rabbi Hana, in order to teach us that we also should clothe the naked. People who don't have money to buy clothes, we should buy clothes for them. So they shouldn't have to be naked. The Bible teaches that the Holy One visited the sick. We should visit the sick. When did God visit the sick? Here in Genesis 18, he visited Abraham after the Brit Milah, right? So that is there to teach us that we also should visit the sick. The Holy One comforted those who mourned. You should comfort those who mourn. When did God comfort those who mourn? When Abraham dies, he visited Isaac, and the rabbis say that was to comfort Isaac in his loss. So we should also comfort those who have lost someone. And God buried the dead. We should bury the dead, right? Make sure people can afford a funeral. That everybody deserves to have a funeral and a proper burial. But where did God bury somebody? He buried Moses at the end of the book of Deuteronomy.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
is this where the idea where Jews are against, what's it called?
Cremation?
Cremation.
Yeah. It's just been a very long-standing tradition. The idea that the body is sort of the vessel that contains our soul, and so has a certain amount of sanctity because our body was a vessel for our soul. It is like a holy thing, kind of like words of scripture are holy, even though they're just words, but they contain holy words, so they have some intrinsic value, and we can't just throw them away. So the body also we have to treat with respect and dignity, and it was just considered, not respectful and dignified to burn the body that houses our soul. So we need to treat it with respect and dignity and bury it.
Thank you.
And archaeologists have uncovered ancient Israelite burial sites, and the way it used to be done, they would be buried in caves. There would be a burial cave, and in front of the cave would be a slab of marble or something, where the body would be laid out after the person died, and they'd roll a stone over the cover of the cave. This motif has great significance in the New Testament, because this is how Jesus was buried, but this was just the way Jews were buried generally. They'd be laid out inside a cave, and the stone would be rolled over to cover the cave, and then about a year later the body would have decayed, so there's bones that are left. And in early biblical times anyway, there was a pit sort of where the bones would be collected and placed in the pit with the other bones of the ancestors. So at least according to one archaeologist, he says when the Bible said that he died and was gathered to his ancestors, it was literally he was gathered to his ancestors. Later in the Second Temple times, they had ossuaries, bone boxes made of stone. Not everybody could afford them, but people who could had these bone boxes, sometimes decorated with fancy decoration. And when the body decomposed, the bones would be put in the box and then set into a niche in the cave. But that's the way it was. That's the way the body was treated, not cremated. And nowadays, there's another reason for not cremating, which is
Holocaust.
because of the Holocaust. So it's particularly how Hitler disdained Jewish bodies and treated Jewish bodies as, fuel for a fire, basically. So we shouldn't perpetuate that. That's an additional reason now for not doing cremation. Okay, so let's go back to our thing here. So those are The idea is God has, in the second blessing, we recognize God's awesome powers in the Gevurot. The most awesome power, of course, is that he has the power of life over death. Some doctors, and anybody, I guess, who does the Heimlich maneuver or mouth-to-mouth resuscitation or whatever, can actually bring somebody sort of back to this world and sustain them. But even beyond that sort of ultimate saving of a life, we can do other things that are described in the Gevurot prayer, that God upholds the falling, heals the sick, etc. We can do those things. So when we recite the prayer, at least this is what I do when I recite that prayer, and I think about God doing those things, I'm really thinking we're God's agents. We're doing those things on God's behalf, right? It's our hands and feet that do these things because we're inspired to do them by God. So it's, God's commanding us to do them on his behalf, basically. And some of those things are found in Psalm 146, which is part of the Psuke de Zimra, the verses of song that we sing before the formal Shacharit service begins. Psalm 146 has this part down here, Adonai matir asurim, Adonai frees the bound, Adonai pokeach ivrim, Adonai gives sight to the blind, Adonai zokef kfufim, right? He raises up those who are bent over. Adonai ohev tzedekим, he loves the just, right? He protects the stranger. He supports the orphans and the widow. He frustrates the designs of the wicked. These are all things God commands us to do, right? This is all part of Jewish law. We're supposed to do all of these things. And again, my view is that God doesn't miraculously make these things happen supernaturally. What God does is inspires us to be his agents to do these things. So when I read this psalm, and when I recite the second blessing of the Amidah about God's amazing powers, I think about us as being inspired, moved, invigorated, to do them on God's behalf. And so now we get to the Kedusha, which is the holiness. We're almost out of time. So I might save the Kedusha for next time because I want to spend a little more time on that. Does anybody have any questions so far about the first two blessings? Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to look at the Kedusha next time. That's the holiness of God. And then we'll look at the last couple blessings also of the Amidah.
You never talked about the heretics.
The heretics, yeah. Right, so the blessing that he designed for who are the heretics? Right. So it's quite possible that the heretics they're talking about there are the early Christians. That's one possibility. Some scholars believe that. But the Jews also had some issues with the Samaritans and other sects that were kind of quasi-Jewish. So here it's kind of like it's kind of like a sibling rivalry. For some reason, let's say, trying to think of an analogy here. Democrats and Republicans, boy, this is going to really get me in trouble. Democrats and Republicans here seem to really despise each other, right? Even though we're all Americans. But they don't really care so much about what the Chinese are doing or what the Saudi Arabians are doing. It's not even on our radar scope. It's only about the people who are next to us who we feel like, well, why don't they see things the way we do? What's the matter with them? There must be something wrong with them, etc. So a sibling rivalry, right? We care much more about our siblings' behaviors than we do about other people's behaviors. So I think that's what happened here. You have these other sects in Israel at the time that are sort of quasi-Jewish. They seem to be doing some of the things we're doing, but then they're different in some significant ways. And you need to distinguish yourself from them. you know, Buddhists are completely different, but they're not on our radar scope. We don't really care. Hindus are completely different, but they're not on our radar scope. We don't really care. But these people are almost like us, but they're different. So there must be something wrong here. We need to push them away. And so they composed a prayer to say, look, these guys are wrong. They're misinterpreting what our tradition says. And I'm not disagreeing with them either. I mean, I think, you know, there were differences. And so they're saying we need to keep them out of our community because our community does this and they're similar, but just different enough that it's not us. And we need to make a sharp distinction here. So that's what that prayer was about, to try and distinguish them. So whoever that other was, whether it was early Christians or Samaritans or some other group, it was the fear that they were like us, so they might somehow dilute or alter how we understand ourselves if we keep them in our midst. So we're going to push them out, let them do their own thing, but not with us. Yeah, Judith.
Yeah, if I could ask you a question from last week, could you remind me, why do we not say the second line of the Shema out loud?
Oh, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Yeah, so the reason is the Shema itself and then the Ahavta are the verses in the Torah from Deuteronomy, and the Baruch Shem Kavod is not part of the Torah. That was an insertion the rabbis stuck in there. Now they stuck that in there because their view was, when you recite Shema Yisrael and you say that there's only one God, it's not just saying there's only one deity in the universe. It's also an assertion that that deity who created the universe is the absolute authority over us, right? Not money, not power, not fame, not glory. None of the other stuff is important in the world. You want to remember that you live in a created world and you owe the Creator the responsibility to take care of the world He gave us and the people around us, right? That's the most important thing. Don't be selfish and greedy and whatever. You know, that's worshiping other gods, right? God is the source of authority, the source of authority. And so the way you express source of authority in those days was Melech, king. And so it's Baruch Shem Kavodo is his glorious name. Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, his kingdom is eternal. That's the only God. And they wanted that idea of God's kingdom to be part of what you think about when you say that there's only one God, that He is the ultimate authority. So they stuck that phrase in to remind you that that's what you're supposed to be thinking. But it's not part of the Bible text.
Okay.
So the solution was, say it softly.
Thank you.
Now, one other thing about that. It may be, remember there was that expression from temple times that when you had a community prayer, you would the Shema wasn't just recited, wasn't just read, it was pores. There was some liturgical way of doing it that was described with the verb pores in Hebrew. Well, pores means to separate, to divide. And so it's some kind of antiphonal reading. The leader would say something, the congregation would respond, it seems, right? So, but we're not exactly sure what the leader's statement and the congregational response was, but one suggestion is the prayer leader would say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and the congregation would respond, Baruch Shem Kavodo Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Right, so when it was done liturgically in the temple, when they would pores et Shema, then it was done where the Baruch Shem was said out loud. And since we're not doing it liturgically the way it was done in the temple, because there is no temple, we don't do it out loud anymore. That's another way, possible explanation for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, thanks for coming. And so next week we'll finish up with the Amidah, and then starting May 10th, I'm going to do unorthodox Jewish beliefs, which I've done before, but there's opportunity for Zoom people who couldn't attend the class when I did it earlier. So we'll be looking at questions like, why do bad things happen to good people? Why does God have coronaviruses? But also, you know, what can we think about God? How can we believe or understand about God? Does God communicate with people? What were the prophets doing? Who wrote the Bible? And what happens in the afterlife, right? So all those questions, I'll be using Jewish sources, but sort of giving them a modern, sort of unorthodox spin to it. So that'll be from May 10th to the end of June.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Interesting.
All right. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.